As you know, thanks to the constitutional amendment approved by voters last week. At the federal level, things are a little bit different. Former members of Congress can continue to collect a pension after a conviction as long as the appeals process is not fully exhausted. That can take years. Congresswoman Claudia Tenney says that's a loophole that should be closed. She's joining me now from Washington to explain her bill that would do just that. Congresswoman, welcome back to Capitol tonight.
Thank you. Great to be on.
No Pensions for Corrupt Politicians Act. That's kind of catchy.
Yeah, I love it. It's just like what we had in the state assembly and thankfully got passed this past year, or this past election day. And I'm introducing a very similar measure on the federal side for corrupt politicians on the federal side who can actually get convicted and continue to go through the appeals process and continue to get their pension. Now, ultimately, they could end up being exonerated.
Right.
But if they're not, then, and if they are exonerated, they can go back and recoup what they may have lost. But you know, at this point, the taxpayers are going to continue to fund the appeals, the lengthy time, and it looks like there's no end in the appeals process. You know, they can appeal, minutia, and we'd like to see the money saved right away, and then in the end, hopefully, if they are proven to not be guilty, they can have there's relief.
So how would that go, though? They would put the money would be put in escrow, and just in case you're exonerated, so you can get the money back.
Yeah, we could do it that way. I mean, we haven't actually anticipated where we're going to put the money in that way. But at the moment now, Shaka Fatah is the example that we're using out of Pennsylvania. He's just continuing to appeal. And the taxpayers are continuing to fund the pension. It almost looks like a loophole that if you just keep the appeals process going, you can go, forever and not have to pay the consequences of committing a crime in the commission of your official duties. Of your official duties.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, it doesn't,
One of the issues, as you'll recall, that was debated here in New York when we took several years to get to the point where we now have the constitutional amendment. They actually watered it down somewhat because unions were nervous that it would have applied too broadly to public employees, not merely, decision makers and elected officials. So do you have a similar aspect to your?
Yes, same thing. This applies to members of Congress and the Senate.
And that's
it doesn't apply to anyone else.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there an appetite for this, do you believe, among your colleagues?
Oh, yes. I've already, I introduced the bill and already was on a show with Congressman Sean Duffy from Wisconsin. He wants on it. Everyone in my Financial Services Committee has come up and said, hey, I like that bill. I want to be on that bill. And a lot of them didn't realize in New York we'd actually passed a measure that would give, as you know, the judges the option to pull a pension for a corrupt politician and dealing with, crimes involving bribery and use of their official position to enrich themselves. And so that's really how it's limited in that way as well. It's very similar to the New York bill.
So it's interesting that everyone's sort of clamoring to get on this. I mean, as I mentioned, it took years for us to get there in New York, and people are interested at the D.C. level, maybe because it seems simple in comparison to the other things that you're wrestling with.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. I mean, everything is a struggle, obviously, here because we have close majorities and we have to work really hard to find consensus across the aisle and find bills. So it's a little bit more of a struggle here, and everyone comes from a different part of the country that has very different implications, and so that's part of the big difference here. You don't have the huge lopsided situation like I had when I was served in the Assembly, where we I don't even know what the numbers are, 108 to 42 or something in that.
It's somewhere in that range.
So,
yep. Well, things have switched around after Tuesday, but I also want to ask you. I mean, right now, what we're really focused on, of course, is the tax reform situation. You guys had procedural votes today. You expect to have a full floor debate and a vote tomorrow. How will you be voting?
I'm leaning yes right now, and it's been a real struggle to get there. What's happened is we fought very hard to get the state and local tax deduction. Initially, it was completely eliminated in the House bill. We were able to get that added back in, a $10,000 deduction for people on the property side for property taxes. We also were able to recover a number of tax credits. For example, the child care tax credit, something that's really important to me as a single parent. So I'm going to raise my son who was dependent on quality child care. We got it raised from $1,000 to $1,600. I worked with Ivanka Trump on that. We'd love to get it even higher, but we're still working on our version of the bill, that's out. But we got a lot of things added back in. It's not perfect. There's not everything I want. But right now I'm leaning yes, because I'm going to tell you, this bill, interestingly enough, while Chuck Schumer and Governor Cuomo are screaming about, the billionaires and millionaires getting a benefit, actually this is a middle class tax cut, and in my district it is. And
but hold on.
Interesting.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, let me explain it, because the quick thing, look, the president has deliberately kept in Obama's highest tax rate of 39.5%, which affects them. If you look in my district, I have a lot of retirees, a lot of people that are lower and middle income families, hardworking families. They're the ones that are going to benefit the most from this, because they're going to be doubling the standard deduction. We're eliminating the alternative minimum tax. We're lowering the rate substantially. So you're going to be, if the first $24,000, you're not going to pay any tax at all. Plus, you're going to get the deduction for property tax. And let me just tell you, in my district, 99% of the people in my district have houses that are less than 600,000. In fact, most of them are probably less than 300,000.
But a couple of points. First of all, the Medicare hit. That was something that's just come out in the last 48 hours or so. That's not something that concerns you?
No, I don't think that that's going to affect, because of the standard deduction and the credits that are going to be going back in. That's not going to affect the middle class. That's going to be something that's going to affect people in the higher incomes. All this discussion about how really leave it to Chuck Schumer and Governor Cuomo to advocate for the 1%, really the wealthiest in our societies, people like the trial lawyers who are the 1% in personal service industries who contribute nothing to the gross national product, are not the ones that are going to be helped by that. And if they want to advocate for them, I'm going to advocate for the working people, the people at our level that are actually going to get a tax cut in NY22, which is the district I represent.
Well, the problem, though, is that there are significant discrepancies, or differences, I should say, between the version that may or may not pass tomorrow, if in fact the votes are there, and we'll see, and what the Senate has put forward, right? And the Senate now has thrown into the works the individual personal mandate as a part of Obamacare. Now, you may very well have wanted to see that go away, because there's been a real fight about that. It's the really cornerstone of Obamacare. But when you're merging these two very difficult issues together, isn't the Senate making this more complicated?
Well, here's two big issues, though. The individual mandate is the biggest myth that's being perpetuated on every scale. First of all, almost 77% of people who supposedly were going to sign up for Obamacare opted to pay the penalty, so they're not getting health care at all. So the mission of Obamacare to get people on the program is not happening. Taking away the individual mandate does not mean that people can't go and choose their own health care. What it does, though, is provides us with more revenue, because we're in the reconciliation process, so we have to keep this revenue neutral.
You need the revenue.
The Senate, the Senate is complicating this. And I could be honest with you, I'm leaning yes on this bill, the House version. If the Senate comes back and we don't get the SALT concessions, the state and local tax concessions that we advocated for, and the things that we wanted in the House, it's going to be very hard for me to support this bill. But we're going to be fighting hard to even add more to the bill and give more flexibility, especially to our hardworking families who are going to be seeing a tax break. I think it's just outrageous that they're trying to call this something that's a tax cut on the backs of the middle class. The biggest complainers of this are the wealthiest people in our country, or in our state, and the wealthiest earners down in New York City. And I am concerned about that, because that's going to affect, it's going to affect our revenue stream. I remember once when Governor Patterson was the new governor in town, and he said, we're going to get rid of those Wall Street bonuses. He came to find out that, guess what, without the Wall Street bonuses,
you can't run the state.
You're not going to get the revenue that you need. But you know what the problem is? We need to lower taxes. I've been advocating for this for all 6 years I served in the state assembly.
I have heard that from your
colleagues.
We need to lower. So,
yes.
Congresswoman,
from me too.
And from you now. Before I let you go, I do have to ask you, you mentioned being new in town. We have now seen this week one of your colleagues from California make some really startling accusations regarding sexual harassment on a hearing on the Hill. You're new. Have you experienced that? Have you seen it? Are you concerned about it? They're talking about, and also, what is your position on Roy Moore running for the U.S. Senate seat in Alabama?
Look, sexual harassment is a very serious issue. I know very few women I know that haven't been a victim in some way or another, and it's a serious issue that also can be distorted, and we could have wrong accusers. I haven't experienced that as a member of Congress or in the state assembly personally. I know it does go on. As you know, the Vito Lopez incident and many others in the state assembly were problems. The Roy Moore thing, I finally found, I've been so consumed with tax with tax reform and dealing with my committee, the Financial Services Committee, we had 15 bills that we've been working on around the clock for the last 2 days that I finally got to look, and I'm really disappointed with what I'm hearing on the yearbook signing. I don't know if that's legitimate or not, but also saying I got permission from the mothers. I mean, this is just not acceptable as a woman leader from my perspective, and I'm not sure. It's up to the voters to make that decision on the Senate race, but I think these are really serious. This is getting serious if these are proven to be true. So, yeah, sexual harassment is a very serious issue. We need to protect and defend people who are victims, because their victims are. It's just, my heart goes out to anyone, and I know my friends, many of us have been in that situation. Some of us are stronger than others, and some of us are in more vulnerable situations.
Okay.
But we definitely have to be advocates on that.
Congresswoman, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I thank you
you
so much, and obviously we'll be bringing people news as it breaks on Capitol Hill, as it
Yes,
seems
thank
to
you.
do
I appreciate it.
by
Thank
the
you.
hour. Thank you.